My name is Ethan Miller. I was 33 that year, living in Willow Creek, the kind of small town where if you bought flowers at 8 in the morning, by noon, the owner of the diner knew who they were for, why you bought them, and probably whether the person receiving them deserved them. I owned an old shoe repair shop on Main Street. The shop had belonged to my father before me. The wooden sign out front had been bleached pale by years of sun. The floorboards creaked every time a customer stepped inside. Behind the counter, the air always carried the same quiet mixture of leather, glue, shoe polish, and black coffee. It was not the kind of place that made people think about love. At least, that was what I used to believe. I was a steady man, not exciting, not dramatic. I opened the shop at 10 minutes to 8 every morning and locked the door at 6. I ate dinner alone in the little apartment above the store. I called my mother every Sunday. From time to time, I repaired a pair of shoes for free when I knew some kid's family was having a hard month. I was not the kind of man people stood up and applauded for because they thought he was about to propose to the prettiest woman in town. But on that Saturday night, that was exactly what happened. And the problem was this. I had never planned to propose to Clara Hayes. I did not even have a ring. I had only gone to the town hall like everyone else, wearing a white shirt I had ironed too carefully, the old leather shoes my father left me, and telling myself that all I had to do was stand up, say a few words of thanks after the charity auction, and sit back down. But by 8:17 that evening, nearly all of Willow Creek was on its feet, clapping. Helen, who owned the diner, had both hands pressed over her mouth and tears in her eyes, as if she had been waiting half her life for that moment. Old Paul, our mailman, whistled from the back row, and the piano player in the corner began playing a love song I had never asked for. Clara stood beside me. Clara Hayes, 31 years old, owner of Willow Flowers, the little flower shop right next door to my repair shop. For 6 years, she had been the woman who left black coffee outside my door every morning. She knew I hated raisins, disliked roses, and always locked my door twice before going to bed. She was the woman the whole town called Ethan's girl. And I, the biggest fool in Willow Creek, kept correcting them by saying she was only my friend. That night, Clara wore a deep green dress, the color of tulip leaves after rain. In her hands, she held the white bouquet she had arranged for the charity event. At first, she smiled because she thought everyone was only teasing us, the way they always did. Then the man hosting the auction lifted the microphone and said, "Well, folks, it seems tonight we're not only saving the old library, we may also be witnessing the happy ending of a 6-year love story." The applause grew louder. Someone shouted, "Do it, Ethan!" Someone else laughed and called, "Finally!" I turned toward Clara. In that moment, I saw her smile slow down. It did not disappear. It only slowed, the way a small flame bends when a door opens somewhere nearby. I should have understood. A kinder man would have understood, but I did not. All I could see were 100 faces watching me. I saw the microphone in the host's hand. I saw Clara standing too close, beautiful enough to make my throat close. I saw an entire town waiting for me to do something I had never been brave enough to name. And because I was afraid, I said the worst sentence of my life. "No," I said with a short, awkward laugh. "No, everybody's got it wrong. Clara and we're just friends." The whole room went silent. Not ordinary silence. It was the kind of silence that lets a man hear his own heart backing away in shame. The piano stopped in the middle of a note. Somewhere, a spoon fell to the floor. Helen lowered her hands from her mouth. Paul stopped whistling. Clara was still standing next to me. She did not cry. If she had cried, maybe I would have understood what I had done. If she had gotten angry, if she had walked out at once, if she had slapped me, if she had told everyone I was an idiot, maybe I would have learned faster. But Clara only smiled. A small smile, polite, composed, so full of hurt that I did not recognize it as hurt. "Of course," she said softly, "just friends." Then she set the white tulips on the nearest table as if they had suddenly become too heavy to hold, and walked out of the hall. No one clapped anymore. No one laughed. And I stood there under the cheap yellow lights of the town hall, microphone in my hand, having wounded the only woman who had stayed beside me for 6 years, still not understanding why the whole room looked at me as if I had committed some unforgivable crime. People have asked me since then when I first fell in love with Clara. I have always hated that question. It makes love sound like a doorway. One day you are outside, the next day you step through. With Clara, there was no doorway. She came into my life the way morning light enters through a crack beneath an old shop door. At first it was thin, then it was there every day, and by the time I noticed, the whole room had been bright for years. 6 years before that awful night, she rented the empty storefront beside mine. Back then, the old sign outside still said Murphy's Hardware, even though Mr. Murphy had moved to Florida to live with his daughter the previous spring. The front window was filmed with dust. A crack ran down from the upper corner of the glass almost to the lock. Inside, the place smelled of damp wood, old newspapers, and silence. I remember the morning she arrived. A white pickup stopped at the curb. Clara climbed out and began unloading 3 boxes of fake flowers, 2 buckets of paint, a folding ladder, and a small radio with a missing antenna. She wore faded jeans, an oversized gray sweater, and her hair tied up with a pencil. She did not look like someone opening a flower shop. She looked like someone trying to begin her life again with her bare hands. I was behind my counter, stitching the sole of a cowboy boot, when I heard something metal crash outside. I looked up. Clara stood on the sidewalk, staring at the fallen ladder. A can of white paint had rolled near my door, leaving a long streak across the concrete like somebody had drawn a mistake through the morning. I stepped outside and picked up the paint can. "Need a hand?" I asked. She looked at me. Her eyes were gray-blue, tired but unwilling to surrender. "I need a ladder that listens better," she said. That was the first thing Clara Hayes ever said to me. I laughed. Not because I was being polite, not because it was the funniest thing anyone had ever said. I laughed because it had been a long time since someone had spoken to me as if I were still a normal man. I was 30 then. 3 years earlier, I had been engaged to a woman named Rebecca. The invitations had been printed. The church had been reserved. My mother had cried twice from happiness. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Rebecca told me she could not go through with it. She did not hate me. She simply did not love me enough. I have never known a sentence that could be so gentle and so cruel at the same time. After that, I became very good at being fine. I opened my shop on time, I closed it on time, I repaired people's shoes, replaced zippers on winter coats, mended handbags for older ladies, drank black coffee, ate dinner alone, and did not date. I did not complain. I told myself peace was enough. Then Clara opened her flower shop next door. On the first day, I helped her stand the ladder upright. On the second day, I helped her take down Murphy's old sign. On the third day, she brought me a cup of black coffee and set it on my counter. "I didn't know how you took it," she said, "so I guessed no sugar. You look like a man who doesn't trust sugar." "You guessed right," I said. "That is more worrying than impressive," she replied. From that day on, coffee appeared outside my shop every morning. Not every cup came with a note. Sometimes it was just a paper cup set on the step, steam rising in the cold Willow Creek air. Sometimes Clara drew a crooked little smiley face on the lid. Once she wrote, "Do not forget to eat lunch, old shoe man." She called me old when I was barely 30. I called her the weed girl because the first time I saw her shop, I could not tell tulips from the wildflowers that grew behind the church. She said I was hopeless. I said she was the only person alive who could sell a half-wilted bouquet for $20 by calling it rustic. That was how we became part of each other's day. In the mornings, Clara opened willow flowers at 7:30. I opened my shop 10 minutes before 8. She always arrived before me, even though she claimed to hate mornings. I knew because the warm yellow light in her shop was usually on before the sun had fully risen. In spring, the sidewalk between our stores smelled of damp soil and cut stems. In summer, she propped her glass door open and let her old radio play out into the street, fading in and out, and sometimes she sang along with complete confidence and very little accuracy. In autumn, maple leaves gathered in front of both shops. I swept my side and then, since I already had the broom in my hand, I swept hers too. Clara never said thank you. She simply left a small apple pastry beside my coffee the next morning. In winter, I shoveled snow from both doorways. Clara set a little bundle of pine in a tin can outside my shop and said, "My place looked like where shoes came to die and needed signs of life." I thought that was friendship. I truly did. In a town as small as Willow Creek, 2 single people over 30 are not allowed to exist peacefully side by side. Helen at the diner started it before anyone else. Every time Clara and I came in for lunch together, she asked, "Are you two still paying separately today, or have you finally gotten smart enough to share a bill?" Clara usually laughed. I laughed too. "You know we're just friends, Helen," I would say. At first, Clara would toss a French fry at my plate and say, "Exactly, and I have much higher standards." Everybody laughed. I laughed with them. What I did not notice was that, as the years passed, Clara laughed a little less at that sentence. There are small changes a frightened man will pretend not to see. Like the day Helen called Clara Ethan's girl, and Clara did not correct her at once. She only looked at me for 1 second. Just one. As if she were waiting for me to say something different. I looked down and added ketchup to my plate. Or the day old Paul delivered one of Clara's packages to my shop by mistake. The box said, "Clara Hayes, Willow Flowers." Paul handed it to me and said, "This one's for your wife." "She's not my wife," I said immediately. Paul grinned. "Not yet?" I laughed with him. I did not look through the window next door. If I had, maybe I would have seen Clara standing there with flower shears in her hand, watching me a moment longer than usual. But I did not look. That is the trouble with the things we fear most. We do not always run from them. Sometimes we simply learn not to look straight at them. And I did not look straight at Clara for 6 years. Not because she was unimportant, because she mattered so much I was afraid to give her a name in my life. She was the person who kept my spare key. She knew the anniversary of my father's death even though I had never plainly told her. Every year on that day, she placed white tulips in the window of my shop. No card, no speech, just flowers, as if to say some grief does not need to be dragged into the light to be seen. She sat beside me in the hospital when my mother broke her wrist. She scolded me for wearing the same coat for 10 winters. She knew I drank coffee black, hated raisins, preferred repairing old shoes to new ones, and locked my door twice at night because my father had taught me to. And I knew things about her too. I knew she was afraid of thunder, though she never admitted it. I knew she liked tulips more than roses because roses made people expect too much. I knew she did not eat onions. I knew she pretended not to like children, but always kept candy in the drawer for the little ones who wandered into the shop. I knew all of that. But I still called it friendship. The charity auction at the town hall was supposed to be simple. The old library needed a new roof. Willow Creek had one of those libraries that smelled of paper, rain, and dust. A small brick building with ivy on one side and a reading room where half the town had learned to love books before they learned to drive. When the roof began leaking over the children's section, people decided something had to be done. Clara volunteered to decorate the hall. I donated a pair of handmade leather shoes my father had made years before and never sold. They were dark brown, almost chestnut, with careful stitching along the toe. They had sat in the glass case behind my counter for as long as I could remember. I had never had the heart to sell them, but the library mattered to my father, so I told myself it was time. The week before the auction, Clara spent her evenings arranging flowers in the hall. She said the place looked like a basement that had lost the will to live. I helped carry boxes, hang paper lanterns, and pretend I knew anything about centerpieces. One evening, we were alone in the hall after everyone else had gone home. Rain tapped the windows. Clara stood on a chair, trying to hang a string of lights across the stage. "Hold this," she said. I took the end of the cord. "You know," I said, "for a library roof fundraiser, this is starting to look dangerously romantic." She looked down at me. "Careful, Miller. People might think you have a heart." "I've got one," I said. "It's just under repair." She smiled at that, a softer smile than usual. Then she asked, "Is it?" I should have answered differently. I know that now. But at the time, I only shrugged and said, "Maybe. Hard to get parts for an old model." She went back to the lights. I remember that clearly because the bulb nearest her face flickered on then. And for 1 second, she looked both warm and sad. I remember thinking I should say something. I remember deciding not to. A man can ruin his life with silence long before he ruins it with words. The night of the auction, Willow Creek showed up in its best clothes. The town hall smelled of old wood, raincoats, coffee, and flowers. Clara had made the room beautiful without making it fancy. White tulips on every table, small lanterns overhead, greenery along the windowsills. The old stage curtains looked less tired than usual. People were laughing, bidding too much on homemade pies, used fishing rods, antique lamps, and a quilt Mrs. Benson insisted had taken her 3 months, even though everyone knew she had started it 10 years earlier. Clara moved through the room, checking flowers, straightening ribbons, and making sure every table looked as if it belonged in a much richer town. I watched her from near the back wall. I remember thinking she had made the hall beautiful. I did not know everyone else in that room thought she had made it beautiful for us. The misunderstanding started with Helen, as most trouble in Willow Creek did. Earlier that week, she had caught me in the diner looking at a small velvet box someone had left in the lost and found. I had picked it up because I thought it might belong to one of my customers. Helen walked by at exactly the wrong moment. Her eyes widened. "Ethan Miller," she whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" "It's not mine," I said, which was true. But Helen heard what she wanted to hear. That same day, I asked Clara what time she wanted me at the town hall, and I said, I need to make sure everything happens at the right moment. I was talking about the auction order and my father's shoes. Helen, sitting 3 booths away, apparently heard the word moment and built an entire future out of it. By Saturday night, half the town believed I was going to propose to Clara after the final auction item. No one told me. That is the part that still amazes me. A whole town can keep a secret only when the secret is not really a secret to them. To them, it made sense. Ethan and Clara, shoe shop and flower shop, black coffee and tulips. 6 years of shared lunches, shoveled sidewalk, spare keys, hospital waiting rooms, and inside jokes. To them, the proposal was not a surprise. It was simply overdue. After my father's shoes sold for more than they were worth, the host called me to the stage. I thought he wanted me to say something about my father and the library. I stood beside Clara because she had been adjusting flowers near the stage and someone pulled her closer, saying she should take credit too. Then the host smiled at the crowd with the pleased expression of a man about to present a gift he did not understand. Well, folks, he said into the microphone, it seems tonight we're not only saving the old library, we may also be witnessing the happy ending of a 6-year love story. That was when the room erupted. People stood, someone whistled, the piano began playing. And I, because I was afraid, because I was cornered, because the word love felt like a trapdoor beneath my feet, laughed and said, "No, everybody's got it wrong. Clara and I are just friends. Just friends." Two words can be ordinary in one room and brutal in another. That night, they were brutal. After Clara walked out, the host mumbled something about the next item. No one listened. I returned to my seat and sat through the rest of the evening like a man who had walked into the wrong church service. Helen would not look at me. Paul shook his head. Mrs. Benson folded her arms across her chest and stared at me like I had insulted her quilt. When the auction ended, I went outside. Rain had left the street black and shining. The windows of Willow Flowers were dark. Clara's truck was gone. I told myself she was embarrassed. I told myself she would laugh about it in a day or two. I told myself a lot of things that night. None of them were true. On Monday morning, there was no coffee outside my door. That was the first thing I noticed. For 6 years, Clara's coffee had been so regular that I had stopped thinking of it as something she chose to do. It had become part of the morning, like turning the key in the lock or switching on the light behind the counter. But that morning, the step was empty. No paper cup, no crooked smiley face, no note calling me old. I stood there longer than I should have, looking down at the bare concrete. Then I opened the shop. At 7:30, Clara opened hers. I heard the lock turn next door. I heard the bell above her door. I heard the soft scrape of a bucket against the floor. Everything sounded normal except that nothing felt normal. At 9, I found an excuse to step outside. Clara was arranging flowers in the front window. Her hair was tied up with a pencil. She wore a cream sweater and jeans. She looked the way she always looked on Monday mornings. I lifted a hand. She saw me through the glass and nodded. Just nodded. No smile, no sarcastic comment, no cup of coffee held up like a toast. Just a nod. I told myself she needed time. On Tuesday, there was no coffee. On Wednesday, I swept my sidewalk and then hers, the way I always did in autumn. Later, the leaves were back in front of her door and she swept them herself. On Thursday, Paul delivered a package to my shop that was clearly addressed to Willow Flowers. I carried it next door. Clara opened the door before I could knock. "This came to me by mistake," I said. "Thank you," she answered. She reached for the box. For one ridiculous second, I did not let go. Her fingers brushed mine. She looked down at our hands, then back up at me. I released the box. "Clara," I said. "I have a delivery to finish," she replied. Her voice was not cold. That would have been easier to fight. It was calm, polite, distant, like I had become a customer. By Friday, I was angry. Not at her, though I told myself I was. I was angry at the whole town for making something awkward. Angry at Helen for starting it. Angry at the host for saying what he had said. Angry at myself without being brave enough yet to call it that. At lunch, I went to the diner alone. Helen poured my coffee and did not ask what I wanted. "You planning on glaring at me all afternoon?" I asked. "Depends," as she said. "You planning on being stupid all afternoon?" I sighed. "Helen, it was a misunderstanding." She set the pot down so hard the coffee jumped in my cup. "No, Ethan, the proposal was a misunderstanding. The rest of it wasn't." I stared at her. She leaned her hip against the counter and lowered her voice. "That girl didn't hurt because people thought you loved her. She hurt because you acted like the idea embarrassed you." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Helen's face softened, which somehow made it worse. "You don't have to love someone just because a town wants you to," she said, "but don't stand in front of everyone and make a woman feel foolish for hoping." I looked into my coffee. She hoped? Helen gave a sad little laugh. "Lord help us. Men can rebuild a tractor engine and still not see a heartbreaking right beside them." I left the diner without finishing lunch. On the way back to the shop, Paul was sorting mail outside the post office. He saw me and shook his head before I said a word. "You too?" I asked. "I have eyes," he said. "Everyone seems to think they know more about my life than I do." Paul tucked a stack of envelopes into his bag. "Sometimes that's because they aren't hiding from it." I should have walked away. Instead, I asked, "Did Clara ever say anything to you?" Paul took his time with the answer. "Not in the way you're asking. Clara isn't the kind of woman who puts her heart in someone else's mailbox and hopes they deliver it for her." I looked toward Willow Flowers. But every year on your birthday, she mailed you a card. From the post office, not from next door. Always signed only with a C, as if you couldn't know." He glanced at me. "You kept them?" I did not answer. Because I had kept everyone. They were in the drawer beneath my cash register. 6 cards, simple, funny, never too much, never too little. I had told myself they were friendly. That evening, after closing, I opened the drawer and took them out. The first card said, "For the oldest 30-year-old I know." The second said, "Another year of saving souls. Try saving your own sometime." The third said, "Your father would be proud of the man you are, even when you forget to eat vegetables." I sat behind the counter, reading them again under the desk lamp. My father had died the year before Clara opened her shop. I had not told many people how hard that year had been. In Willow Creek, grief travels fast, but the real shape of it stays private. People brought casseroles, they patted my shoulder, They said my father was a good man. Clara had not known him, but somehow she understood what losing him had done to the shop and to me. I remembered the first anniversary of his death after she moved in next door. I had opened the shop early, hoping work would keep me from thinking. At 8 o'clock, I noticed a small bunch of white tulips in my front window. No note, no explanation. Clara's shop was still closed. Later, I asked her about them. She was arranging daisies and did not look up. They looked better there than in my cooler, she said. I accepted that lie because it was easier than saying thank you for seeing me. Every year after that, the tulips appeared. And every year, I called it kindness. By the next week, the whole town had settled into a new kind of silence around us. No one teased us anymore. That was when I realized how much teasing had filled the air between Clara and me. The jokes from Helen, the whistles from Paul, the little comments from customers who crossed between our shops. Without them, Main Street felt stripped down and cold. I began to notice the empty spaces. No coffee on the step. No radio drifting from her open door. No Clara leaning into my shop at noon and saying, "You are either eating lunch now or I am telling your mother." No shared walk to the diner. No insults about my coat. No tulips tucked into a chip mug on my counter when she had extras. It was astonishing how much of a life can disappear without a door slamming. One afternoon, a boy named Tommy came into my shop with a pair of sneakers that had split at the side. Tommy was 11, skinny as a broom handle, and always trying to look tougher than he was. His mother worked double shifts at the grocery store. I had been fixing his shoes for free for 3 years. He set the sneakers on the counter and looked toward the window next door. "Is Miss Clara mad at you?" he asked. I picked up one shoe. Something like that. My mom said grown-ups call things friendship when they're scared. I looked at him. "Your mom said that?" She said it after watching one of those movies where people kiss in the rain. "Ah." He leaned on the counter. "I thought Miss Clara was your family." The awl slipped in my hand. "Why would you think that?" Tommy shrugged. "She knows where you keep the candy. She tells people not to bother you when your head hurts. She made you soup when you had the flu. And she yelled at Mr. Carter when he said your prices were too high." I remembered that. Mr. Carter, who owned 3 rental houses and complained about every bill, had accused me of overcharging for a repair. Clara had come in from next door, carrying a bucket of lilies, and said, "Ethan undercharges everyone in this town, Mr. Carter. If you want cheaper than fair, try learning to sew leather yourself." I had been embarrassed. But I had also been warmed by it in a place I did not have a name for. Tommy watched me. "Are you going to fix it?" "Your shoe?" "No," he said, with the bluntness only children can get away with. "Miss Clara." I did not sleep much that night. Rain came down after midnight, soft at first, then heavy. From my apartment window above the shop, I could see the dark front of willow flowers. The awning moved in the wind. Water ran along the curb and shone under the streetlights. I remembered something Clara had told me 2 years earlier. It was during a summer storm. Thunder cracked so loudly that the windows rattled. I stepped next door to check on her, pretending I needed packing tape. She was behind the counter, standing very still. "You all right?" I asked. "Fine," she said too quickly. Another thunderclap rolled over the rooftops. She flinched. I stayed. I did not say I knew she was scared. I only sat on the floor near the counter and helped her sort ribbon until the storm passed. When it was over, she said, "You didn't have to stay." I told her I needed the tape. She looked at the unused roll on the counter and smiled. That night, in my apartment, I understood something I should have understood years earlier. Love is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a man sitting on the floor of a flower shop, pretending to need tape so a proud woman does not have to admit she is afraid of thunder. And sometimes cowardice is not leaving. Sometimes cowardice is staying for 6 years and refusing to say why. The next morning, Clara's shop did not open at 7:30, or at 8. By 9, I had repaired the same heel twice because I kept looking out the window. At 10, Helen came in carrying a paper bag. "Blueberry muffin," she said, setting it on the counter. "I'm not hungry." I didn't ask. She looked toward the dark flower shop. "She's at the greenhouse." The greenhouse sat behind willow flowers. In the narrow yard, Clara had turned from a patch of weeds into a world of glass, soil, and green things. She used it for plants that needed more care than the front shop could give. "Helen," I said, "did she ask you to tell me that?" "No." "Then why are you telling me?" Helen studied me for a long moment. "Because for the first time all week, you look like a man who knows he's the problem." I found Clara in the greenhouse, watering seedlings. The air inside was warm and damp. Condensation blurred the glass walls. Rows of young plants lined the tables. Outside, the sky was gray, but inside, everything was alive and green. Clara stood with her back to me. Her hair was tied with a pencil again. She wore an old flannel shirt over a t-shirt and muddy boots. There was nothing fragile about her. That made it harder. "Clara," I said. She turned off the hose. "Ethan?" The way she said my name was polite enough to hurt. I took one step inside. "I owe you an apology." "Yes," she said. No softness, no rescue. I nodded. "I handled that night badly." She gave a small laugh, but it had no humor in it. "Handled it badly?" Ethan, you made it sound like loving me would have been the most ridiculous idea in the world. The words hit harder because she did not raise her voice. I didn't mean it that way. I know. She set the hose down carefully. That's almost the worst part. I did not understand. She looked at the rows of seedlings instead of at me. I don't think you're cruel. I never did. You didn't stand there and decide to embarrass me. You panicked. And maybe that should make it better, but it doesn't. Because it means that somewhere inside you, the idea of us was something you had to escape from. No, I said, that's not true. Then what was it? The greenhouse was very quiet. I could hear water dripping from leaves. I could hear a truck passing on Main Street beyond the brick wall. I could hear myself breathing, too slow, too careful. I was scared, I said at last. Clara closed her eyes for a second. Of me? Of losing you. That made her look at me. I tried to say it right, but everything in me had years of practice saying things wrong. After Rebecca left, I promised myself I wouldn't put my life in someone's hands like that again. I thought if I didn't call something love, it couldn't be taken from me. Claire's expression changed, not enough to forgive me, enough to understand that the wound was old. So you called me friendship. I swallowed. Yes. She looked down at her hands. Do you know what that felt like from my side? I shook my head. It felt like standing in a doorway for 6 years while the person inside kept saying, "You're welcome here, but don't call it home." I had no answer for that. She continued, still calm. I did not need you to propose to me in front of the town. I didn't need a ring. I didn't need some grand speech under paper lanterns. I just needed you not to act like the possibility of loving me was embarrassing. There it was. The sentence that opened the whole truth and left me standing inside it. Clara, I said, you were never embarrassing to me. Then why did you correct people so fast every time they joked? I looked away. Because she was right. Every time someone called her mine, I rushed to deny it. Not gently, not thoughtfully, fast. Like a reflex, like self-defense. I had told myself I was protecting her from gossip, protecting myself from assumptions, protecting our friendship. But maybe all I had really protected was my fear. I'm sorry, I said. She nodded once. I know. Then she picked up a small pot and moved it from one table to another. Something about that small motion frightened me more than if she had cried. It told me she had already begun moving things inside herself too. There's something else, she said. My stomach tightened. What? I got an offer. From a floral studio in Hartley. They want me to manage the shop for 6 months, maybe longer. Bigger orders, weddings, events, a real chance to learn things I can't learn here. Hartley was 40 miles away, not across the country, not impossible, but far enough to change the shape of every morning. When? I asked. End of the month. It felt as if the floor dipped beneath me. Were you going to tell me? She looked at me then. Before Saturday, yes. I thought maybe... She stopped. Maybe what? Clara smiled a little, not the old smile, a sadder one. Maybe you would give me a reason to stay. The words should have made me speak at once. They should have made me cross the room, take her hands, tell her everything I had been too afraid to say. Instead, I froze. Because a frightened man can recognize a door only when it is closing and still be afraid to walk through. Clara saw it. Of course she did. She had always seen me too clearly. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't say something now just because I'm leaving. Clara. No. Her voice shook for the first time, but only slightly. I waited for a man who was sure. I can't build my life around a man who only reaches for me when the room starts to empty. I felt that sentence all the way through me. I'm not asking you to stay, I said, though my voice wanted to betray me. Good, she said, because I need to go. Not to punish you, not to make you chase me. I need to go because I have to remember I'm not foolish for wanting to be loved out loud. There was nothing weak about Clara Hayes. That was one of the first things I loved about her, though I did not know I loved it. She could be gentle without being fragile. She could forgive without erasing herself. And in that greenhouse, with damp air on the glass and soil under her nails, she stood before me not as a woman waiting to be chosen, but as a woman choosing herself. I left without asking her to stay. It was the hardest decent thing I had ever done. The days that followed felt like living beside a clock that was counting down too loudly. Clara kept the shop open. She still sold flowers, still answered customers, still moved through Willow Creek with her head up. If people whispered, she ignored them. If Helen hugged her too long, Clara patted her back and changed the subject. If Paul looked at me with pity, I pretended not to see. I began repairing things I had ignored for years. The loose hinge on my back door, the cracked step outside the shop, the lamp above my workbench. Maybe I thought if I fixed enough small things, I could become the kind of man who could fix the large one. One evening, after closing, I found a pair of shoes outside my door. They were Clara's. Old brown ankle boots with scuffed toes and worn down heels. I knew them immediately. She had worn them the first week she opened Willow Flowers, back when she was hauling paint, climbing ladders, and pretending she was not terrified of failing. There was a note tucked inside one boot. Can you fix these before I go? No signature. She did not need one. I carried the boots inside and set them on my workbench. For a long time, I only looked at them. Those boots had stood beside me through 6 years of mornings. They had crossed the sidewalk between our shops. They had tracked soil into my store. They had tapped under the diner table while Clara argued with me about pie. They had climbed the town hall stage beside me on the night I hurt her. They were not valuable, but they mattered. I worked on them slowly. I cleaned the leather, rebuilt the heels, restitched the places where the seams had begun to open, polished them until they looked cared for, but not new. Because Clara would have hated new. She liked things with history, as long as the history did not make them unusable. While I worked, I thought about every time I had repaired something for Clara without saying what I meant. A loose shelf in her shop, a broken drawer, a door that stuck in winter, a window latch after a storm. I had told myself that was friendship too. Maybe love had been speaking through my hands for years while my mouth kept lying. When the boots were finished, I placed them in a box. Then I sat behind the counter with a blank card in front of me. I must have started that note 20 times. The first version sounded like an apology. The second sounded like begging. The third sounded like a man trying to make himself noble. I threw them all away. At last, near midnight, I wrote the only truth I had. Clara, I don't know when I fell in love with you. Maybe because I was already living inside it before I was brave enough to notice. Maybe because loving you became so much a part of my day that I mistook it for the day itself. I'm not writing this to ask you not to go. You should go if going is what you need. I am writing because, for the first time, I want to give the right name to what has been true for years. I love you. Not because the town thought I did. Not because you are leaving. Not because I'm afraid of being alone. I love you because every morning, before I knew how to say it, I looked for you. Ethan. I read the card 3 times. Then I placed it in the box with the boots. Clara was supposed to leave on a Saturday morning. Of course it was raining. Not hard. Just enough to make Main Street shine and make everything feel like a memory before it was over. I opened my shop early. The box sat on the counter. I had barely slept. At 7:30, the light came on in willow flowers. At 8, Clara stepped out carrying a cardboard box of supplies. She wore a navy coat and had her hair tied back. She looked toward my shop. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she crossed the sidewalk. The bell above my door rang when she came in. It sounded too loud. Morning, she said. Morning. I pushed the box toward her. Your boots are done? She looked at the box, then at me. Thank you. She reached for it. This time, I did not hold on. But I said, Clara, wait. She stopped. Her hand rested on the box. I had imagined that moment many times during the night. In my imagination, I spoke clearly, maybe even beautifully. In real life, my hands shook. I need to say something, I told her, and I know I may have lost the right to say it in a way that matters, but I need to say it anyway. Clara was quiet. I took a breath. I love you. There. The words did not make the ceiling collapse. The floor did not open. The world did not end. It only became honest. Clara's eyes filled, but she did not look away. I kept going because if I stopped, fear would find me again. I love you, Clara Hayes, not because Willow Creek thought I did, not because you're leaving, not because I'm lonely. I love you because for 6 years I chose you every day before I was brave enough to call it love. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was hurt there, and hope and caution. All of it deserved respect. Ethan, she said softly, if I still go, what happens then? That was the question. Not whether I loved her. Whether my love could survive not getting its way. I looked at her and gave the only answer that was worthy of her. Then you go. And I call you. And I visit when you want me to. And I learn how to love you with words, not just habits. I don't want to be the man who keeps you small so he doesn't have to be afraid. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost annoyed by it. I hate that you're saying this now, she whispered. I know. I waited so long. I know. And part of me wants to be angry enough not to care. I know. She gave a small, broken laugh. Do you know anything else? I smiled because I could not help it. I know you hate onions. I know you pretend thunder doesn't scare you. I know tulips are better than roses because roses ask for too much. I know you sing the wrong words to every song on your radio. I know you keep candy in the drawer for kids you claim are annoying. I know your boots are fixed, but the left heel may feel stiff for a day or two. Her mouth trembled. And? I looked at her fully then. No looking down, no pretending, no calling the most important thing in my life by a safer name. And I know you are not my habit, I said. You are my home. For a long moment, Clara said nothing. Rain tapped against the front window. Across the street, Helen stood inside the diner, pretending not to watch. Paul slowed his mail truck at the curb and then, wisely, kept driving. Clara opened the box. She saw the boots first, then the card. She read it in silence. I watched her face change one quiet piece at a time. When she finished, she folded the card carefully and put it back in the box. I'm still going to Hartley, she said. I nodded, though it hurt. I know, for 6 months. Okay? And I am not promising you everything today. I don't expect you to. She studied me. But you can call me tonight, she said. It was not a grand ending. There was no music, no applause, no ring, no town hall full of people holding their breath. Just Clara Hayes standing in my old shoe shop, giving me something better than a happy ending. A beginning I would have to earn. She picked up the box and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back. Ethan? Yes? For the record, I knew you loved me before you did. I laughed, and it came out half joy, half shame. Apparently the whole town did. Yes, she said, but I was hoping you would be the first to say it right. Then she left. Clara went to Hartley. For 6 months, Willow Flowers was managed by her cousin, who had no interest in my coffee habits and played music too loudly in the mornings. Main Street went on, as towns do. The library roof was repaired. Helen kept pouring coffee and giving opinions no one asked for. Paul kept delivering mail and pausing outside my shop just long enough to make sure I was not being stupid again. And I called Clara that first night. Then the next. Not every call was easy. Some nights we talked for an hour about nothing. The weather, her new shop, my customers, a wedding order she hated because the bride wanted roses dyed blue, Tommy's repaired sneakers, Helen's latest pie experiment. Other nights were harder. Clara told me when something I said sounded like fear, dressed up as patience. I told her when I missed her so badly I wanted to drive to Hartley without asking. She reminded me that asking mattered. I learned. I was a steady man, not exciting, not dramatic. I opened the shop at 10 minutes to 8 every morning and locked the door at 6. I ate dinner alone in the little apartment above the store. I called my mother every Sunday. From time to time, I repaired a pair of shoes for free when I knew some kid's family was having a hard month. Imperfectly, but truly. I drove to see her on Sundays when she wanted me there. The first time, I brought coffee from Willow Creek and worried the whole 40 miles that it would be cold by the time I arrived. It was. Clara drank it anyway and told me it tasted like an apology with poor temperature control. I helped fix a shelf in the back of the Hartley shop. She looked at me and said, "You don't get to make every repair a love language." I said, "I am expanding my vocabulary." She rolled her eyes, but she smiled. That smile did not erase what had happened in the town hall. Nothing should have. Love that asks a person to forget their hurt too quickly is not love. It is impatience. So we did not rush. I apologized more than once because some wounds need more than one honest sentence. Clara forgave me in pieces because that was the only honest way to do it. By the time spring came, the old rhythm between us had not returned. Something better had taken its place. Before, I had relied on habits and let them do the speaking for me. Now I said things, simple things. I miss you. I'm proud of you. That scared me, but I'm still here. I want you in my life, and I know wanting is not the same as owning. The first time I said I love you on the phone, there was a long silence on the other end. Then Clara said, "Say it again." So I did. 6 months later, Clara returned to Willow Creek. Not because I rescued her, not because the town demanded it, not because love means giving up every other version of your life. She came back because she wanted to open a second part of Willow Flowers, a design studio in the back greenhouse, while keeping connections in Hartley. She came back with new ideas, new confidence, and 3 boxes of vases she claimed were absolutely necessary and I claimed looked like expensive jars. On the morning she reopened, I found a cup of coffee on my step. Black, no sugar. On the lid, she had drawn a crooked smiley face. Under it, she had written, "Still old, still under repair." I stood there on the sidewalk holding that cup for longer than necessary. Then Clara opened her door. She wore jeans, a green sweater, and her hair was tied with a pencil. She looked at me across the narrow space between our shops. "You going to drink that?" she called, "or write a poem about it?" "I might do both." "Please don't." I crossed the sidewalk. For the first time in 6 months, there was no distance between our mornings. But there was also no pretending. Helen saw us from the diner window. Paul saw us from his mail truck. Mrs. Benson saw us from the corner and nearly walked into a lamppost. No one said anything. I think the whole town had finally learned to let us have one moment without performing it for them. Clara handed me a small bunch of white tulips. "For your window," she said. I looked at them. "My Father's Day isn't until next month." "I know." "Then what's this for?" She shrugged. "Maybe I just like seeing them there." I took the tulips. This time, I did not pretend not to understand. "Thank you," I said. She nodded. "You're welcome." Then I reached for her hand. Not dramatically, not like a proposal, just my hand finding hers in the morning air between a shoe shop and a flower shop on Main Street. She let me. A year after the town hall incident, the old library held another fundraiser. The roof had been fixed, but now they wanted new shelves, because old buildings are like old men. Once you repair one thing, 3 more start complaining. Clara decorated the hall again. This time, I helped without making jokes about romance to avoid saying anything true. There were tulips on the tables, lanterns above, the same piano in the corner. At one point, Helen walked by and whispered, "No surprises tonight, right?" I said, "Not unless you start one." She pointed two fingers at her eyes and then at me. Later, Clara and I stood near the stage watching people bid on pies, quilts, and a set of fishing rods no one needed. She leaned close enough that her shoulder touched mine. "You nervous?" she asked. "A little." "Good. Keeps you humble." I smiled. The host called me up to say a few words about the library. For half a second, I was back in that room a year earlier, under those yellow lights with the microphone in my hand and fear crawling up my throat. Then I looked at Clara. She stood near the front, arms folded, watching me with a small smile. Not waiting for me to save her. Not waiting for me to define her. Just there. This time, when I spoke, I did not hide. I thanked the town. I thanked the library volunteers. I thanked my father, whose love of books had been quieter than his love of shoes, but just as steady. Then I looked at Clara and said, "And I want to thank Clara Hayes, who has made this room beautiful 2 years in a row, and who has made my life better every morning for longer than I deserve to understand." The room went very still. Not the terrible silence from before. A warm silence. The kind that gives a man space to finally say the truth without trapping him in it. Clara's eyes shone. Helen made a sound like she had swallowed a sob and a laugh at the same time. Paul muttered, "About time, but quietly enough to be kind." I did not propose that night. That is important. This was not a story about fixing a public mistake with a bigger public gesture. Clara was not a prize to be won back in front of witnesses. She was a person. And love, real love, is not proved by making a scene. It is proved by what you do when no one is watching. So I simply handed the microphone back, walked off the stage, and stood beside her. Clara looked at me. "Every morning?" she whispered. "Every morning," I said. She took my hand under the edge of the table where no one else could see. That was enough. I still repair shoes in Willow Creek. The sign outside my shop is older now, and the floorboards still complain under every customer. My hands ache when it rains. My mother says I need a better chair. Helen says I need better curtains. Paul says I need to stop letting people pay me in pies. Clara still runs Willow Flowers next door. Her business is busier now. She does weddings in Hartley twice a month, complains about roses, praises tulips, and still keeps candy in the drawer for children she claims are loud and sticky. Every morning, there is coffee. Sometimes on my step, sometimes on hers. Sometimes we drink it standing in the narrow space between our shops while Main Street wakes up around us. People still tease us. The difference is that now, when Helen says, "How's your girl, Ethan?" I do not correct her. I say, "Busy, brilliant, still too good for me." And Clara, if she hears it, usually says, "At least he knows." She is right. I know now. I know that fear can wear the mask of caution. I know that silence can hurt as much as a careless word. I know that calling love friendship does not make it safer. It only makes the person offering it feel unseen. And I know this. There are mistakes you do not undo. You live differently because of them. I still think about that night at the town hall. Not because I want to forget it. I do not want to forget it. Some mistakes need to be kept, not as a way of punishing ourselves, but as a way of remembering who we are trying to become. I remember the cheap yellow lights. I remember the piano stopping in the middle of a song. I remember the white tulips Clara set down on the table. I remember her face when I said, "We're just friends." And every time I remember, I look toward the flower shop next door. If it is a Friday morning, I might see Clara behind the glass, hair tied up with a pencil, flower shears in her hand, frowning because some customer has asked for a bouquet that looks expensive, but not too expensive. If she sees me, she lifts her coffee cup. I lift mine back. No applause from the town, no microphone, no one shouting finally, just me knowing, and her knowing, that some people enter your life so quietly you mistake them for part of the morning. Then one day, when they nearly leave, you understand. They were never a habit. They were home.